Hey Gear Seekers, I'm Nick. For the last few years, AMD has been behind all of the competitors in raw performance for both CPUs and GPUs. This year with Ryzen 5000, they showed us that they had the chops to deliver something that can hand them the CPU performance crown again. Can they make it a double whammy with their GPUs as well? Stick around to find out. To kick this off, we have no idea about availability or whether or not you'll be able to get your hands on these cards at launch. We're just here to show you what we found with this card. AMD also didn't send us the 6800, so we can't compare the 6800 XT to that in this video because we physically don't have one. With that said, we did this one slightly differently since there's far more to cover about this GPU on another video. So we did the best that we could with the time we had available to give you guys the numbers that we found with this GPU from AMD. And to make your lives a little bit easier, there's also chapters in all of our videos, especially these review videos. So if you want to jump to a certain section of a video, it's as easy as using that mouse in your hand and moving over that progress bar or checking out the timestamps in the description below. Also, make sure you watch this whole video all the way through to get the context of what we're trying to say with this video. Now, these are the out-of-the-box figures as well, with a few exceptions that we'll explain in this video. But yeah, all of our GPU videos are designed to be this way because the vast majority of people will never overclock their GPUs. And this is more indicative of the real-world users out there. For people who want to know how they overclock, we just didn't cover that in this video, except for a few exceptions. Okay, let's get the benchmarks and comparisons out of the way first. Now, these graphs are weighted based on performance of the cards that we're not focusing on from our entire database. These graphs change because the cards perform differently and some cards get knocked off the graphs. Some people don't like it, but that's what works for us. We used our regular test bench to give you guys results based on what we've tested in the past. However, there are some changes in this video, which we'll go through a little bit later. But with that said, let's kick it off with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. You can use that magical pause button at any time during the video to take a look at the graphs for a little bit longer. The first thing you're probably noticing, even with this 1080p benchmark, is the 6800 XT is delivering the goods compared to these new NVIDIA GPUs. And NVIDIA's kind of dominated this space for many, many years. So this is a very welcome surprise for me, considering yeah, NVIDIA's just always been better in this regard. When we compare Windows to Linux, we're seeing the Linux performance is a lot better than with Windows with Vulkan compared to DX12. AMD actually provided drivers for launch for us for Linux, so the whole process was a lot easier. We're also using the latest ACO compiler, but given the design of these new drivers, we had to drop back to Ubuntu 20.04 for testing. That's not my ideal solution, but it did save us a whole lot of time. At 1440p, we're seeing the 6800 XT perform at the same level as the RTX 3080. And this is kind of what we were expecting, seeing what AMD said from all their press stuff, but to actually see this result is kind of cool. With Linux, we're seeing the same thing as well with the 6800 XT. It also keeps up with the 3080. At 4K, we're seeing the Windows performance just falling short of the 3080 in this regard. In the Linux testing, we're seeing a significant difference between the 6800 XT and the 3080, with the 6800 XT coming up as the weaker card in this test. Okay, let's move on to Unigine Superposition. For the Superposition test, we performed 3 tests in total. We used the 4K optimized preset, the 1080p extreme preset, and a custom 1440p preset with depth of field and motion blur turned off. Before someone comments something along the lines of us using the stock OpenGL implementation versus DX11 for comparison, we're comparing the out-of-the-box experience for people who are going to use this card. For people who know how to extract more performance out of Linux, this video is not for you. First up with the 1080p Extreme benchmark, this one is highly GPU bound and we're seeing the 6800 XT fall behind the 3080 significantly. When we switch over to Linux, we're seeing the exact same results echoed again. OpenGL does not perform well in Linux, and that's just how it's always been with this benchmark in particular. And we have tested this in the past with many different kernels and other different distro combinations, but the reality is it's always just about the same with this benchmark. At 1440p, the 6800 XT is slightly faster than the 2080 Ti, and I like how Superposition can show that some cards are weaker than others when testing. At 4K, we're seeing the same thing happen with both Windows and Linux. The NVIDIA 30 series cards pull away from the 6800 XT on this occasion. And this is kind of what we're seeing with Superposition in general. And that's mainly to do with DirectX 11 and OpenGL. Next up, Basemark GPU. Now, Basemark gives us a great indication of Vulkan performance in both Windows and Linux. At 1080p in Windows, the driver's timed out. So yeah, there's no results here, and it's pretty annoying since we couldn't get a single Windows-based 1080p run done. We encountered this with other testing that we did too on our Ryzen 5000 test bench. We did not encounter any 1080p issues with testing in Linux though. They completed without issue. And Basemark on this occasion is usually geared towards NVIDIA and Intel CPU combinations, and that actually gives us a little bit of perspective for what we're going to see next. At 1440p, the Windows performance is about the same as the RTX 3070 Gaming OC. However, in Linux, the 6800 XT is a lot stronger, falling somewhere between the 3070 and the 3080. This is again echoed at 4K in both Windows and Linux as well. But let's circle back to all of those benchmarks again, but this time we're going to take a look at a specific feature set and test whether or not these new features actually equal more performance. For testing, we're switching over to our Ryzen 5000 test bench with the ASRock X570 Taichi with the 5900X and a pre-release BIOS that enables extended bar support, which will enable us to use Smart Access Memory, or SAM, whatever they're calling it. Now, expanding the bar address space is nothing new. It's usually something that's controlled at the kernel level in both Windows and Linux. However, it's now being implemented with the CPU microcode to make it completely operating system agnostic. Once you have a motherboard and CPU to support it, there are a few things you need to do to actually enable it. You'll need to disable CSM in the BIOS, you'll need to enable above 4G decoding, and then enable the resizable bar support. We're also going to show you if rage mode equals more performance with these GPUs as well. Taking a look at Shadow of the Tomb Raider again at 1080p, if we compare to Windows with both SAM enabled and disabled, we're seeing quite a significant bump in performance. With both SAM and Rage Mode enabled, what we're also seeing with this preliminary testing as well is that PCIe Gen 4 might have more of an impact on performance than it did with Navi. We're actually going to jump into this in another video and fully investigate this, but yeah, given our time constraints, we didn't actually get time to fully dive into this. What you're going to see with Linux is that with SAM, it only gives a slight performance bump, but I suspect that's to do with the driver implementation. And I'm gonna actually revisit this later with kernel 5.9 when we get our hands on a 6900 XT at a later date. At 1440p, we're seeing the same thing occurring again with Rage Mode and SAM both being the optimal configuration to maximize the performance from the 6800 XT. At 4K, we're seeing those gaps close with Rage Mode not adding any real additional performance. With Superposition at 1080p using DX11, we're seeing it not add anything outside a margin of error, with the extra performance in Windows and Linux being about the same. At 1440p, we're seeing how much more competent the 5900X is as a gaming CPU, but not really adding anything with extra performance with SAM and Rage Mode enabled. At 4K, there isn't much difference at all. There isn't much to report here with Superposition, and this could potentially change, but for now, this is just how it is. All right, let's jump over to Basemark at 1080p. 4 of the 7 runs would not even complete. Now, we had this same issue regardless of whatever motherboard and CPU combo was being used. I even threw this GPU into my gaming rig that has a 3950X, and we had the exact same error occur. At 1440p with SAM enabled, we're seeing a significant bump in performance, but with Rage Mode, we're only seeing about another 3 FPS on top of that. Lastly, at 4K, we're seeing a difference of around 10 to 13 frames with a combination of SAM and Rage mode enabled. Okay, I'm gonna level with you guys as well. We didn't get time to test any professional workloads, but not for the reason that you're thinking. The reason is we had quite a bit of driver instability issues running OpenCL workloads. We did try to run our Blender benchmarks, but they just timed out the driver. And I'd like to think it's because it's a beta driver, but given AMD's track record with drivers, it's really hard to say. And I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt and revisit all of this when their final drivers come out. But this driver issue also prevented us from testing other things, but I'm gonna revisit all of this in another video when we have different drivers. It's a little bit frustrating, but I mean, there's not much more I can do about it. We also ran our 1-hour stress test in Filmmaker. We couldn't get the 6800 XT above 68 degrees in our 18-degree climate-controlled office. This result is a lot better than I expected, given the cooler is basically a huge heatsink with 3 fans on it. There's no visible heat pipes. That said, we did see the junction temperature hit boiling point at 100 degrees Celsius. This result is actually quite acceptable, but we're running on an open air test bench. The results on a closed system will be far different from what we observed. We do include these results on our open air test bench because it's consistent and everything that we've ever tested has been tested in this exact same way. As far as power consumption, we didn't see the board power hitting more than 273 watts at full load in Rage mode, and this is actually a little bit lower than the advertised 300 watts that AMD was saying. We also observed the 6800 XT to be pretty quiet with a tiny bit of coil whine. It's definitely not as severe as the 5700 XT reference cards that we saw when they came out. And you also have to remember, we're running on an open air test system, so you're going to hear absolutely everything. In a closed system, you probably won't hear this card. The reason why we talk about these acoustic observations is because it makes way more sense for a normal user, since the numbers from acoustic testing probably won't make sense to a regular punter. Acoustics are only really tangible if the card's sitting right next to you, so that's why we do it this way. Overall, I'm liking the size of this card. It's a 2.5 slot card, or maybe just a little bit less, and it's not huge for the sake of being huge. We actually did a size comparison video if you want to check that out. It's in the top right hand corner right now. Personally, for builds, I prefer working with cards like this because they're just more versatile and I can fit them in smaller spaces. I think the Radeon 6800 XT is a step in the right direction for AMD. This is the first time in many years that we've seen a GPU that can truly compete at the high end from AMD. The issues I encountered with the Windows driver, I really hope are just teething problems with the pre-release beta drivers, but given their track record with their Windows GPU drivers, it's pretty hard to say. Their Linux drivers have been pretty good for a long time, but with Windows, it's always been pretty hit and miss. And what I will say though, this competition is gonna be really, really good for you guys and us as consumers. Now, if we compare the launch price of the RTX 3080 Founders, which is basically a meme at this point, that release was $699 US. The 6800 XT is releasing for $649 US. I'd say that the 3080 is not $50 US better. It's not even close. The additional 6 gigs of VRAM that the 6800 XT has, coupled with the Ryzen 5000 SAM support right out of the gate, makes it a far more compelling buy for the long-term user. However, the price of entry for AMD with these features is a lot higher because you need a supported motherboard and you need a supported CPU to get the most out of this GPU. That being said, the resizable bar support is also coming to NVIDIA GPUs soon, so the differences might actually begin to even out with pricing. That means the 6800 XT in the long run could actually be a better buy. That being, if you can actually get your hands on one at all, and given what we're seeing this year with supply and demand and the pandemic everyone thinks is over, and that impacting the production and yields of all these GPUs, I don't see these cards being widely available at launch. I could be wrong, but again, it's pretty hard to say for sure. As for partner cards, I've heard nothing from any board makers. We do know that we'll probably get them, but the only thing I've really seen on social media is the Sapphire cards, and yeah, we're actually getting some Sapphire cards, so stay tuned for that. So let us know what you guys think of these new AMD GPUs. Let us know if you're trying to get your hands on these at launch. We've got a bunch of other content planned with these GPUs as well. And once we get stable drivers, I'm gonna revisit basically all of this. I'm gonna revisit content creation and professional workloads, because for now, I can't even get half of these benchmarks to run properly. Yeah, but I do think this is a very interesting GPU from AMD. It's pretty good to see something that it's going to be competitive, but there are a few letdowns for me for launch, but again, teething problems, but who knows. Anyways, guys, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you didn't like this video, you know what to do, hit that dislike button twice. Once again, thank you so very much for watching. I'm your boy Nick with Gear Seekers. You peek, we seek. And yeah, I'm interested to see the direction and where they go with these GPUs. My initial impressions are pretty good. I have tested ray tracing and stuff like that, had a few instability issues. I have been testing Dirt 5 with ray tracing and that kind of stuff as well. I have a whole nother video planned with all the ray tracing stuff too, but if I included it in this video would have gone for like 40 minutes, so I didn't want to do that to you guys. I just wanted to give you guys the nitty-gritty right from the get-go. Thanks for watching.